Hello everybody and welcome back to Everything Created. Last time we did the leopard gecko care sheet, and we are going to be moving on to the crested gecko care sheet now. And again, like I said before, if I said before, I don't remember, we will be graduating with the bearded dragon because I'm sure I will disagree with a lot of this information. So I'm going to save that one for last because I expect that to be the longest video. So far the others have estimated about 20 minutes or so. Hopefully I won't get too lengthy with the others. We'll see. It says crested gecko care sheet. Crested geckos, also known as eyelash geckos, were thought to be extinct until 1994 when several relatively large thriving populations were found on the islands of New Caledonia. Good information. I'm not sure, if it was 1994, like I don't know if that's the year. I haven't really looked into it, but I have heard of that. So I'm not going to disagree because I don't know any different. It says, for the facts, average adult size, 5 to 8 inches, average lifespan, 5 to 10 years with proper care. Definitely shooting really low on the lifespan. They usually, well, I say that. Average and what they can have are two very different numbers. So on average, they probably do live 5 to 10 years. But they really should be living 15 to 20 with what they're capable of living to. So if they die, in a 5 to 10 year range, they probably didn't have proper care or something went wrong. You don't want to just assume that there was bad care involved. And it says their diet is omnivorous. Kind of. It would be insectivore / frugivore. They eat primarily fruit and insects, so they don't actually eat plant leaves or anything. So I'm not sure if it would be exactly omnivorous, but not my place to say. Okay, again they mentioned they will reach adult size in 9 to 12 months under ideal conditions, and then it says to upgrade your habitat size as your reptile grows. I mentioned in the last video you do not have to upgrade as it goes on. You can just go ahead and throw them straight in the biggest size as long as you have a lot of plant cover and different areas for them to hide so they don't get stressed. Oh boy, this has a lot of writing in it. It's very full. It says the scientific name is Corolophus ciliatus, which is true. A diet says well-balanced crested gecko diet consists of commercial crested gecko food, which is a complete balanced diet. This powder can also be used to dust insects. As a treat, provide a variety of insects, including gut-loaded, which means recently fed, crickets, mealworms, and waxworms. Sweet baby foods such as peach, banana, or apricot can be mixed with the crested gecko diet and offered as a treat. I wouldn't necessarily recommend the baby food things because they typically have preservatives in them. I don't necessarily recommend baby food for babies either. So it says, again up top, crickets, mealworms, and waxworms. So I mentioned on the leopard gecko video that you shouldn't give them mealworms or waxworms very often. It may not be such a big deal for crested geckos since they don't eat insects very often. Most people only feed them insects about once a week. So for the most part, they will be getting a commercial crested gecko food, which is just like it says here, a complete balanced diet. It's a powder that you mix with water, pretty easy to do. If you want to save yourself some time, you can mix quite a lot in advance, at least a little bottle full, and just give them some of that every other night. So it says feeding. Things to remember when feeding your crested gecko. Fresh, clean, chlorine-free water should be available at all times. Feed commercial food every night and remove uneaten food in the morning. You don't necessarily have to remove it in the morning, but I would say you might want to remove it before it gets too old, because after the second night it's getting pretty old. You want to take it out for sure. So 24 to 48 hours is about what it lasts. Typically, it just depends on conditions in your tank. Normally, I try to remove mine pretty much as soon as I think about it. So if you choose to take it out in the morning, that's totally fine too. But for an adult, you'll probably be better off feeding them every other day to avoid obesity rather than feeding them every single day. It said insects should be given at night 2 to 3 times a week, and then it says remove uneaten insects in the morning. I'm not sure exactly how they decide that you're going to be removing uneaten insects. If you've ever put a cricket into an enclosure and just let it free, you will realize how hard it is to find them. Also, don't do that because the crickets can actually chew on your reptiles, especially during the day whenever the crested gecko would be inactive. The crickets can actually chew on them and have been known to injure them. I've never seen it happen, but I've heard of it quite a lot, so I would definitely be kind of concerned with that. So most people just use feeding tongs, or basically just long tweezers with some kind of rubber coating at the end, so just in case your reptile bites it, they won't hurt their teeth. But most people typically use one of those to feed their crested gecko insects. I would recommend crickets rather than mealworms and waxworms, but like I said earlier, probably wouldn't be such a big deal. It said 2 to 3 times weekly. I consider that to be fine. Most people, like I said earlier, only do about once a week, but 2 to 3 times would be fine too, I'm sure. Sprinkle insects with a calcium supplement at each feeding and a multivitamin supplement once or twice a week. I'm not necessarily sure that it is a big deal. Again, this is just my opinion, not necessarily a fact, that you have to, I'm not sure that you have to actually dust the insects that you feed them, since you don't feed them insects very often because they have that complete diet which already has everything they need. So when you're adding in extra stuff, I'm not sure that is required at all, especially since the insects are typically considered more of a treat. So then it says housing. An appropriately sized glass or plastic habitat with a secure cover. Height is more important than floor space. I think it is really interesting that they did not give you any kind of like a gallon measure to go by. Mine is in a 40 gallon, or is in a 50 gallon, but that's not necessarily what you have to have yours in. Typically 20 gallons is considered the minimum, and then or an 18 by 18 by 24 setup. So if you do use a 20-gallon tank, you'll want to turn it up on its sides, so that way it's taller rather than longer, because they utilize upward space a lot more than they do horizontal space. Which this care sheet here did emphasize that, which I like. Okay, it says habitat. Provide multiple branches for climbing and shelter for hiding. Live, non-toxic plants are also recommended. Maintain 60 to 80% humidity by misting as needed every day. So the same thing was mentioned on the leopard gecko care sheet. Non-toxic plants, live non-toxic plants are okay. For both of those geckos, they don't actually eat the leaves of plants, so you can use pretty much any plant you want. Now there are some plants like English ivy, for example. I have heard that it is so toxic that if they were to accidentally bite it, like while going after a bug or something like that, that it could in fact kill them. I don't know if that's true, but I would definitely still recommend avoiding some of those plants. But for the most part, plants like this are great, and they are pretty strong, good leaves, and good color. And of course there are thousands of other plant varieties that are perfect as well, but since I had this one here handy, I decided I would show it to you. And it says 60 to 80% humidity by misting every day as needed. Okay, that's good as well, but usually it is, you'll want to let it dry out to about 50% during the day, and then at night, whenever you mist it, you want to let it rise up to about 80 or 90% while they're active. So that way that gives things a chance to kind of dry out a little bit, because anything that stays wet for a super long period of time is going to be susceptible to rot. So you want to be sure to let it dry out a little bit. It says for substrate, use a mulch type substrate such as coconut fiber, dampened sphagnum moss, or bark. For a crested gecko, I would probably make an exception for the for these mulch type substrates. I wouldn't recommend them per se, but since crested geckos spend almost all their time off the floor, it's probably not a big deal if you had substrates like that. But once again, I would recommend the bioactive substrate mix. At least something like that is what I typically use, but for crested geckos, it's probably not a huge deal because, like I said, they're going to be off the ground. It says daytime temperatures between 75 and 82, nighttime temperatures between 68 and 75. Recommend radiant heat. Use a low wattage heat lamp if necessary. This is probably a pretty good range. I would say more along the lines of 70 to 75. I wouldn't go above 80 for sure, because as far as I know, if the temperature actually exceeds 80 degrees, that actually you run a risk for them having some problems from the heat and getting stressed out and potentially dying from it. It says for lighting, provide light 10 to 12 hours a day. An incandescent bulb is needed for the basking area, if not, using a ceramic heat emitter or nocturnal incandescent bulb. That's kind of confusing. All you need is an LED light, really. Especially if your room temperatures are already pretty warm. Crested geckos don't need super high temperatures. If you want to give them a little basking spot, as long as it doesn't affect the temperature of their entire setup, you're fine to give them just a little basking spot if you want to. Some crested geckos might like it, some probably will not. But for lighting, all you need is something that they can see so they know it's daytime. That's the only purpose of lighting for nocturnal animals. They just need to know when it's day and know when it's night. So even if you have a pretty bright bedroom light, that would probably be good enough. But if you grow plants in your enclosure like I do, you'll want something brighter. So in this case, LEDs like I have here typically work out pretty good. It says keep only one adult male crested gecko per enclosure and do not house different species of reptiles together. Again, it said keep only one adult male. Just like with the leopard gecko last week, do not house any of them together, period, regardless of gender. They always specify no more than one male because they seem to think that only males fight. No, females do too. So you'll want to be sure and keep them separated individuals, one crested gecko in one enclosure. That's it. And then here it says the red flags are weight loss or decreased appetite, mucus in mouth or nose, swelling, lethargy, bumps, sores, or abrasions on the skin, labored breathing, paralysis of limbs, abnormal feces, and retained shed on the toes. If I do remember, almost word for word, in fact, they may be word for word. Yeah, pretty much word for word, they use the exact same, not only the same common health issues, but also the same red flags as they used for the leopard gecko. So that tells me that a lot of this information is probably just extremely generalized, so that way they can use it on multiple care sheets, so that way they don't have to go through all the trouble to write each individual care sheet. I get a little bit more frustrated with these care sheets as I go along. Obviously none of them are completely accurate. I'm not even completely accurate. I don't necessarily want to say that my word is fact, so don't take it that way. But these are just my recommendations from my experience, and this is the reason I'm going through here. I'm just showing the problems or things that could be problems out of these little pamphlets, and bringing into light some of the problems with some of these bigger pet stores and the care they provide, the care information they provide. It says normal behavior. Crested geckos are nocturnal, which means active at night. They will spend most daylight hours hidden in their habitat. They are exceptional leapers. They will jump from one perch to the next almost like frogs. They will tolerate gentle handling. Rough handling will stress your gecko and may cause them to drop their tail, which will not grow back. Crested geckos lick their eyeballs to moisten them. That was all perfectly accurate. A lot of I've heard people say about their crested geckos many times, I probably wouldn't have got one if I knew I would never see it, or something along those lines. I know where mine hides, so I occasionally will go check on it without disturbing him. I like just look and make sure he's in there, make sure he's okay, and the tail's still there. Those are the things I watch for, but then aside from that, I pretty much just try to set up their enclosures as attractive as I can, so that way it doesn't really matter if I see the gecko or not. I know they're in there and I know they're happy, and their enclosure is pretty enough to satisfy my eyes, and being able to see that is more than enough for me, as long as I know they're happy. It says for the habitat maintenance, thoroughly clean, and this is exactly the same as what it said last week for the leopard gecko thing. Yep, down to a T. Thoroughly clean and disinfect the habitat at least once a week. Place chameleon in a secure habitat. That is interesting. Okay. Scrub the tank and furnishings with a 3% bleach solution. Rinse thoroughly with water, removing all traces of bleach smell. Dry the tank and furnishings completely. Okay, the one thing, this leopard gecko care sheet does say to put your leopard gecko in a clean habitat for the time being. This says chameleon. Does that look like a chameleon to you? It doesn't look like a chameleon to me. Anyway, but like I said earlier with the cleaning thoroughly, if you have a bioactive setup, you don't have to do that. But if you're doing a sterilized setup, then that is once again accurate. You'll want to clean everything pretty frequently to prevent bad bacteria buildup. Grooming and hygiene. Crested geckos regularly shed their skin. Ensure humidity of habitat is at appropriate level to allow proper shedding. To facilitate shedding, provide a shed box, a hide box with sphagnum moss that will aid in the process. That's not necessary for crested geckos. For leopard geckos, it is, because their habitat is typically so dry. But this is the purpose of why we actually missed a crested gecko setup at night. Whenever they're active and whenever they're going to shed their skin, it will be humid for them if you've sprayed it the day before. So that takes care of that. They don't need a shed box. It says, do not be surprised to see a crested gecko eating their shedding skin. Correct. Signs of healthy animal. Active, alert, and interested in humans. Interested in humans? No, they're not interested in you. If they look at you, it's because they are thinking they might need to run from you. So that could be a sign of health. I don't know. It says clear eyes, body and tail are filled out, healthy skin, clear nose and vent, and eats regularly. Again, the same healthy signs that they gave for a leopard gecko, except they added interested in humans on this one, and that's not true. And then it says body and tail are filled out. Crested geckos are really weird because most of their body weight is actually kind of in the front. I don't know if you can see from here, but they're going to be a little bit thicker towards the front of their body rather than at the back. And then if you look at the tail, it is typically a very thin and narrow tail. And then the common health issues. It gives gastrointestinal disease, metabolic bone or vitamin deficiency, and respiratory disease. Again, word for word, exactly the same as the leopard gecko care sheet that I have right here. Then, for their shopping list for needed supplies, they said that you need appropriately sized habitat, commercial crested gecko food, treats, substrate, moss, food and water dishes, mealworm dish, hideaway place, climbing decor, plants, heat fixture, heat light, under tank heater, which is optional, it says, vitamin supplement, calcium supplement, cricket quencher, cricket keeper, cricket food, thermometer, humidity gauge, and a book about crested geckos. Like I said last time, you don't need a book, you have the internet. For the cricket things, again, I said this in the last video, and it just frustrates me that they repeat themselves on this kind of thing. For the cricket quencher, keeper, and food, I wouldn't recommend the commercial cricket quencher or cricket food. They tend to have a lot of chemicals and things like that in them that are not something that you want. And then it says sources here at the bottom. I haven't read this on the others, but I'm going to go ahead and read it right here on this one. It says, ask a store partner about Petco's selection of books on crested geckos and the variety of private brand products available for the care and happiness of your new pet. All private brand products carry a 100% money-back guarantee. Because all reptiles are potential carriers of infectious disease, such as salmonella, always wash your hands before and after handling your reptile, or habitat contents to help prevent the potential spread of disease. So they are potential carriers of salmonella and other infectious diseases, but in order to actually contract one of these diseases from your reptile, you would just about have to, lick something in their cage. You'd have to really go out of your way to try to get that bacteria in your body, or you would have to have a really, really bad immune system. So the way I should put it, I have been keeping reptiles for, I'm just going to say, approximately 10 years. I have never even heard of anyone getting salmonella or any other disease from a reptile, and I have talked to a lot of people. So it's extremely unlikely. I'm not even sure if it happens anymore, especially since most of them are bred in captivity. Even humans have salmonella bacteria in their gut. That's just the way it is. There's going to be a balance in any place of good and bad bacteria. So you just kind of have to accept it and trust your immune system sometimes. That being said, it does not hurt to wash your hands after handling your reptile. In fact, I still recommend it just to be safe. But it's also good to wash your hands before, and it's definitely important to wash your hands between handling reptiles so you don't transfer anything, such as parasites especially. Alrighty, well that's it for this one. Another one down, and we will see you next time for the Bearded Dragon Care.